Okay, and we are live on YouTube. So I'll just go ahead and put myself on mute till we have a couple more folks and we hit 1 o'clock and then we'll get going.
Sounds good. Hey, Annie, did we test Taylor's? Oh, we did.
We did, yes, thank you.
Missed it.
No worries. All right, welcome folks. It's 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get kicked off. As you know, we are live streaming on YouTube today, and we are also recording today's webinar. So I'll just go ahead and say hello, welcome everyone, and glad to have you at the February Resource Planning Advisory Group meeting for the Puget Sound Energy. RPAG is many people refer to it, which is the acronym that we use for this group, and you'll hear probably many times throughout today. My name is Annie Kilbrick-Smith. I'm with Triangle Associates, and I'm going to be facilitating today. We are just excited to have you all joining us, and just thank you again for your time being here on a monthly basis. I know it's a lot to give this time up, and we really appreciate it. I did want to just ask for RPAG members, if you're comfortable, feel free to keep your cameras on, or at least when you're speaking, so folks can get to know your faces. Just a great place to start as you all are getting to know each other in a remote world. And then while I go over the next few slides, I'd like to ask RPAG members to go ahead and introduce themselves into the chat. You can go ahead and just put your name, your organization, and maybe something that you're looking forward to hearing today at today's meeting. So Ben, if you don't mind putting that prompt in the chat, you can go to the next slide, Claire. So we've got a few quick Zoom reminders before we get started, just so everyone knows how today's going to work. RPAG members and PSE staff are welcome to use the chat during the meeting, and just make sure when you click the blue arrow that it's going to everyone, so that folks attending as a member of the public can also see your messages as long as you're comfortable. And then as questions come in, I'll be reading those out loud. So you'll be hearing from me, and presenters no need to track those. If you'd like to speak, RPAG members, please feel free to just go ahead and use the reactions and click raise hand. And that way I will get you in the queue. You can also, if you're calling in, just say, hey, Annie, I have something to say when you get a moment, and I'll put you in the queue, and I'll go through questions and comments in the order that they're received. The Q&A tool is turned off for today's webinar format, and then for public attendees, chat and hand raise will be disabled until the very end, where we have opportunity for public comment at the end of the meeting, and I'll clearly let you all know when we transition to that. And just again, one more reminder that we are recording and streaming live on YouTube. Next slide, please. So these are our facilitator requests, just a few things that we request from all of you as participants. We would like to just ask that we keep constructive and courteous and respectful conversations throughout today. And I'll be here to help guide you all through that agenda and stay on time. And then if you use acronyms or technical terms, it'd be great to just give a quick explanation or what they stand for, just so that everybody can be on the same page. And then if something's out of the scope of today's discussion, please feel free to drop it into the feedback form that PSE has online, or email it to their ISP email address, as PSE does want to hear from you. Just in a different space is always welcome to do that. And then just a quick heads up, as I mentioned, the public comment will happen after PSE's presentations. And as we've done this a few times now, I believe, we'll be able to have those folks come on camera if they so choose to. So just a heads up on that if you'd like to do that. Next slide. So we'll take a moment for our safety moment today before we jump into the agenda. February is American Heart Month, so just a good reminder that safety also includes taking care of our long-term health, which is so incredibly important. So there's a few simple habits up on the screen that can make that big difference. Getting enough quality sleep, which I know can be extremely hard, eating lots of nutritious foods, staying active, maintaining a healthy weight, quitting smoking if that applies. And just, noting that some of these small changes, if you're consistent, can really add up, and it really takes care of our hearts in a healthy way. So you can show up for yourself and for all those that depend on you. Okay, next slide. You're going to be hearing from a couple different folks from PSE and the Cadmus Group. So we've got Brian Tyson, Manager of Clean Energy Planning and Implementation at PSE. We have Kara Durbin, Director of Clean Energy Strategy. Jennifer Colson, Manager of Operations and Gas Analysis, and then Taylor Batine, Senior Energy Specialist, Cadmus Group. So thank you all for being here and sharing your information and presentations with us, and being open to responding and answering questions to the RPAG. And then just noting that in addition to the speakers, we also have all of the other RPAG members that are able to attend today, and hopefully introducing themselves in the chat. And then we've got lots of PSE colleagues to help answer questions if needed. And then of course we have some members of the public joining us today. So they are listening in and observing the meeting. And then just one more reminder, because I see a couple more people have joined, that if you are an RPAG member and haven't already, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat like some of your colleagues are doing, with your name, affiliation, and if you are hoping to get something out of today's meeting. And then I also wanted to note that we are expecting two equity advisory group members, Glenda and Rachel from the EAG, to be participating today. I see Glenda's name here, and I'd have to scroll down to see if I see Rachel's, but hopefully we'll get both of those folks here. And then we also were inviting the Conservation Resource Advisory Group, or the CRAG, to attend today if they would like to participate, both of those groups to participate in the cost test conversation. So excited to welcome Glenda and Rachel. And then I don't think we're expecting anyone from the CRAG, but if they decide to join, we'll invite them to participate in that conversation as well. Okay, so with that, I'll go ahead and move us over to the agenda. Next slide. So we're going to start with a brief update and recap of the feedback PSE has received to date, and then from there move into the first primary discussion block, introducing the cost test framework and societal impacts. That topic, like I mentioned, as I mentioned, the EAG and CRAG are invited to participate in. And then after that, we'll provide, PSE is going to provide a brief overview of the iterative analysis approach to ground the modeling discussion. We'll then spend our second main discussion block on electrification modeling focused on scenarios 2 through 4, along with scenario 1 as context for the iterative analysis methodology. And then as a heads up, at a few points throughout today, or maybe just 1 or 2, we're not sure yet, we might use a round robin format. This is just similar to January, where we go around and hear from every RPAG member if we haven't heard from you. So just want to give you a heads up, we might use that tool today. We might not. The discussion might just be going naturally and have no need for it. But just wanted to tell you that. And we're hoping to move through this full 2 hours and 15 minutes without a break today, because we know anything beyond 2 hours is difficult for folks to stay with us. So, but if you need to take a break briefly, feel free to do so. And if you all feel like you do need one, just let me know and I will call us to a short break. We'll close with next steps and public comment. And always, I'll try to keep us on time in our time blocks. Any questions about the agenda? And I'm seeing people come into the space and introduce themselves. So thank you so much. Good to see you all. Okay, next slide. So as we move through today's topics, we have 3 primary objectives. First, PSE introducing the cost test framework, what it is, why it matters, and how is it to be applied in the 2027 ISP. Second, PSE is going to be providing an overview of the iterative gas and electric analysis process. So there's shared understanding on how modeling is evolving. And then third, we'll be discussing the electrification modeling approach for the 2027 ISP, including key assumptions and scenarios. So throughout that discussion, we're especially interested in your questions, early reactions, and any areas where you might see risk or sensitivity. So please feel free to jump in. Next slide. And now we're gonna just focus on what we need from you. So as we move through today's topics, like always, we're just really looking for your candid input and hopefully rich discussion on some of these topics. Please share your questions, reflections, advice. As you hear the framework and modeling approach, I'll help keep us on time. Just let us know if anything feels unclear and incomplete. And if you're seeing areas that deeper discussion is needed, just let us know so that we can keep that in mind. And I think that's it from us. We can go ahead and just see if there's any other questions before we get started. And thanks, folks, for continuing to introduce themselves in the chat. And Rachel, thank you for joining. And I did see Glenda as well, both from the EAG. Thank you. Okay. So with that, I think we can go ahead and segue into our first topic. So we're going to have Brian Tyson take us through the recent feedback overview. So Brian, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Annie, and thank you all for being here today. Really appreciate it. I just want to briefly provide some follow-up from the last RPAG meeting we had, which was really just talking about the feedback. We really appreciate all of the feedback that we heard from this group. I know we did the round robin exercise and it was really helpful just to hear everyone's perspective. For all the RPAG members, you will note that the meeting summary does provide just a general overview of the feedback that we heard, and that should be posted online as well. And so we'll continue to consider all the information that we heard as we move forward to consider the sensitivities moving forward. If we can go to the next slide, the main piece I wanted to touch on here is the area that I covered, the team covered on maximum customer benefit sensitivity. So for this particular sensitivity, again, we heard a lot of great feedback here within this meeting and on our general approach on different ways to use the sensitivity. And then following the meeting, we had some feedback, specific feedback that came in through written comments as well. And so one thing I want to reiterate is that, and we talked about this before in the meeting, which is that the models that we're using cannot inherently maximize the benefits. Instead, what we have to do is indirectly maximize those benefits by prioritizing specific resource selection. And so that's a really key piece, a foundational piece in determining what the maximum customer benefit sensitivity is. And so with that, and given the feedback that we heard, we think the best path forward is to use a single sensitivity that prioritizes DER participation and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this is what we heard from you all and from the written feedback as well, is to have that one individual sensitivity that prioritizes those two areas. And the third piece is also really reflective of what we saw in the ISP rule order, which is to do the sensitivity without any sort of cost constraint. And so understand that what you see on the left there is that is how we are defining our maximum customer benefit sensitivity. And so again, really appreciate the conversation we had last month on all of this as we move forward here.
Thanks, Brian. Questions for Brian? Great. Wonderful. And then, yes, I did see Meredith's note, just a reminder for folks in the chat, if you can click down to everyone with that blue option arrow, then everyone, including the observers as members of the public, will be able to see your messages as well. Okay, well, thank you, Brian. We can keep us moving along with Brian and Kara Durbin from PSE, introducing the cost test and societal impacts. So I know we've got about 45 minutes for this topic, so I'll let you two take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Annie, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. So today we really just wanted to begin a conversation with you all around the ISP cost test framework, which is outlined in the rules. And in the packet we sent you last week, there was a copy of the cost test portion of the rules along with the slides. And we hope that perhaps you've had a chance to take a look at those and think about them a little bit. And we'll also touch on the rules a bit at the beginning here. Can you go on the next slide, please, Annie? So goals for today. Our goal is really to consult with you on the initial approach that we've outlined. And I do want to emphasize that this is really a starting point for our conversation today. We are not bringing you a fully baked cake by any means. So as we were preparing for this, we thought the most productive way to structure this conversation, knowing there are a number of elements in the rules to consider, we thought what would be most helpful would be for us to bring forward at least some of our initial thinking on how we are considering some of these societal impacts, and then share with you what information or metrics we think we could reasonably measure, particularly for this first ISP. So we want to start the conversation with you all today, hear any initial reactions or thoughts you might have on the approach. And then if you have specific suggestions or ideas or feedback today, we'd love to hear those. And you can also send them along to us through the feedback report. And then we want to come back next month and pick this back up in our March meeting and hopefully revisit any suggestions we talk about today and as well as anything that comes in through the feedback report, and really talk with you all about how we think we can refine our approach for the cost test. All of your feedback is welcome. We may be limited in time and not able to say yes to everything, but we want to get the ideas on the table. The more specific they are, I think, the better. So in particular, if you have examples of where you know another utility has used a particular metric, that's really great because it just gives us a better understanding of not just what is the metric, but how has it worked in application. So if we could go to the next slide, we'll just start with this slide, which we've shown you before, and we wanted to bring it back now just to illustrate that we are continuing to move along this path. And the cost test is another important aspect of how we consider equity in our ISP analysis. We will be back later in the year to talk more about how it's specifically being considered in decision-making and how it informs outcomes and specific actions as we build towards that preferred portfolio and final plan. Moving to the next slide, and please, Annie, stop me if there are questions that I should stop for along the way. So this is just our general timeline for engagement that we're contemplating over the course of February and March. So we're really thankful that Rachel and Glenda from the EAG were able to join us. Thank you for making time to be here. We wanted to invite the EAG and the CRAG to join us if they could today, because we're really having an introductory conversation today, and then we want to meet with the other two advisory groups over the next month or so and drill down on a couple of specific aspects of the cost test that seem like they fit well with that group's expertise. So And so that's just kind of on that slide, an outline of what we're thinking. And we'll talk more at the end of the presentation of what topics we were leaning towards might make sense. And that plan may evolve as we hear all of your ideas and feedback too. Next slide, please. Okay, what is the cost test? So we did provide the full text of the rule language, as I mentioned in your pre-read, but here we wanted to at least reference the primary subsection in the rules that talk about the cost test and in particular how it needs to be used. So you see in the first part of the rule, it specifically says that the cost test has to be used to determine the lowest reasonable cost of decarbonization and electrification measures at the portfolio level. So that's one important aspect. We're also required to use the cost test as a key input as we work towards selecting the preferred portfolio. So that'll be later this year as we first we'll start that conversation really in May when we see the reference case. And then as you start to see other analysis out of the work of the sensitivities and we start looking at other potential portfolios, then we'll be able to use the cost test in comparing and contrasting those as well. And then finally, the cost test is an input to the commission and specifically to their determination after we work with all of you through April of 2027 and we file a final plan, then the ball is in the commission's court to review that plan and determine whether the plan as a whole is in the public interest. So that's another place where the cost test is an important consideration. So that's just a little bit of background on the rule itself. And if there aren't any questions, let's just keep moving because I know there will be comments as we move along. So next slide is about what does the cost test aim to do? And, I think stepping back and thinking about the rule language, I think hypothetically in an ideal world, perhaps a future state, all of the benefits and impacts could potentially be monetized at a portfolio level, and then they would feed into the cost test framework to lead to a clear lowest reasonable cost portfolio. Unfortunately, not all of the benefits and impacts to our knowledge can readily be monetized, so we need to account for them in one of three different ways. And these are the three different categories that the rule language specifically sort of identifies. The first one is that some can be monetized, so they can be readily converted into dollars, and that's how that will be reflected. Others can be quantitatively provided, so they can't readily be converted to dollars, but can be measured in some numerical or quantitative way. That's pretty straightforward. And then some don't fit either of the previous two categories, right? They can't readily be monetized or quantitatively measured, but that doesn't mean they're not important. It just means their impacts and benefits are something that we need to consider qualitatively and describe. So when we get to that work to get to a preferred portfolio, there's going to be narrative that talks about, well, here are the different things we considered as we evaluated between different options and different plans. And here are the things we qualitatively analyzed for purposes of this work. So moving to the next slide, if you would. So now I just want to talk a little bit about the different required elements of the cost test that are outlined in the rules. And so this slide shows how we're currently thinking about and categorizing the different impacts. So whether we can reasonably monetize them, measure them quantitatively or qualitatively. And for a couple of them that are in orange, we're right now, we're not quite sure what makes the most sense to measure. I do want to emphasize again that this is a starting point. We thought it would be a more fruitful discussion if we put some ideas out on the table and at least shared with you for now how we're thinking about these elements and how we think we could potentially address them. And at the same time, we don't really want to go too far down the path without getting your input. So, in other words, we're not bringing you a fully baked cake. We've identified some ingredients that we think make sense to use. We have some ideas about what that first cake might look like and maybe taste like when it's finished. But we really do need your input before we'll be ready to bake something. Maybe I'll pause there. I see a couple hands up, so I'll pause there. And I do want to note that I'm going to walk through each one of these color-coded boxes in the slides that follow. So we can take questions now, but we'll definitely have a chance category by category to talk about them too. So.
Yeah, Quinn and then Dennis.
Hey, Quinn Weber with the Washington UTC. Good afternoon, Kara. I'm
Hi.
curious about how to what extent PSE thinks they might, like what describing a qualitative benefit might look like.
What describing the qualitative might
Yeah,
look like.
within the plan.
I think, well, within the plan, I envision it as, we would be in the plan itself, in the write-up, we would be talking about, okay, here's the element, here's generally what our working definition of it is, and here's how we considered this as we analyzed X number of portfolios as we compared them with each other, and here's for example, in the preferred portfolio, here's how this particular aspect has perhaps shows these kind of benefits or shows it has these impacts compared to, say, the reference case or the other options that we identify. So that's how we're thinking about it, is that it's a description. I think it also ties into how we ultimately wrap all this together in the decision framework itself, which we're not quite there yet, but we feel like the cost is the sort of the first part that we need to grapple with. But I do think the qualitative pieces also come into play in that decision framework that we'll need to discuss in the plan.
Yeah, and just a quick follow-up on that. Do you envision that you might, within the cost test weight, give more weight to monetized impacts versus qualitative, or are you going to be treating everything kind of flat?
I think it's a little too early to say that, Quinn. And we'd be open to input from the RPAG and others on what they would suggest. I will say in the Clean Energy Implementation Plan context, we did struggle with the concept of do you wait or do you not wait, and what is that? What sort of what results from that? I think it's an important question, but I really don't know that until we get a little farther along and even define these elements of the cost test, it's hard to say whether weighting is going to make sense, particularly for this first one. But we're really going to look to all of you to give us your ideas too on what you think makes the most sense.
Good to know. Thank you for answering my question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Dennis, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I can wait until we go through the blocks and then I can ask my question.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, Dennis. Lauren, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kara, for framing this up. I guess something that jumps out to me is I would be interested in sort of further exploration of how we might seek to quantify reliability, resiliency, risk reduction. Those are the ones that kind of stand out to me. I think there's probably some stuff that we could look at as it relates to like the council's resource adequacy, the Power Council's resource adequacy metrics, as well as in terms of risk reduction, thinking about maybe some of the high natural gas price forecasts, might be something to consider in thinking about that one. I don't know. I mean, I definitely don't have like you said, fully baked like idea today, but I think those are some of the things that we could maybe dig into a little bit more as you guys are thinking through how to move some of that from qualitative to quantitative.
Thank you, Lauren. No, I really appreciate that feedback, and I'll touch on this a little bit more further on in the presentation, but there were several metrics and ideas that were suggested by Lisa Schwartz when we were having the maximum customer benefit conversation that related to reliability and resiliency, as well as the council's work that you referenced, Lauren. So I think there are metrics out there that we can take a closer look at, and that we will, and we'll look forward to which ones in particular you point us to. I think we just keep wanting to think about like, okay, at a portfolio level, what makes sense to measure, and from our vantage point, we're still also wanting to be cognizant of, well, what are we already measuring? What are we already doing, and which of those elements can we pull out, and are they impactful to in some way as we step back and look at this from a broader cost test and all of these different societal impacts together. So yeah, thank you for your comments, and we'll talk more about risk reduction in a little bit and hopefully see what ideas come forth there. But I agree, there are sources we can look at for those, and we're not closing the door on potentially taking something from a quantitative standpoint. We also have our transmission planning team is taking a closer look at some of the materials that Lisa sent over and other things that might be informative there. So we're still working on these pieces, but appreciate the comments.
Great. And then I see Megan's hand up.
Hi, Kara. I was curious. So I saw that some of these have a star next to them saying that they're embedded in the planning model. And I was curious if you're going to go into more detail about that model, which model it is, how some of these are going to be incorporated into it, especially since some of the qualitative impacts like reliability and resiliency looks like they are going to be included and other qualitative impacts are not going to be included. So I was curious if you're going to go into more detail on that in this presentation or if it would be possible to learn more about that.
Kara, are you on mute? Kara, I think you're on mute still.
Oh, I'm
Oh, now
not,
I can
though.
hear you. Now I can.
That was really weird.
That's weird.
Let me try that again. I don't know what
sorry.
happened, but Meg still looks good. Apologies. What I think I was saying was that I will be covering some examples, Megan, as we talk through the reliability, resiliency, and security supply of how they're embedded in the model. We also have our modeling experts on the line. So to the extent there are particular areas that you're interested in, we can talk about those a little bit more further. So either here or offline. So happy to do that.
Thanks, Kara.
Okay, did you hear all of that this time?
Yes.
I think my mic's okay. All right.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. That was odd. Hopefully it won't happen again. We'll let you know.
I know I'm in the office, so here's hoping it'll keep working. Thank you. Okay, so where was I? I think one of the things I also wanted to share is that one of the things we've learned from our previous work with both the 21 IRP, the electric progress report, and then of course the CEIP and the biennial update, all these precursor plans that we're building upon, right, is that, you know, you need to start somewhere. And one of the things, the lessons that we learned with the Clean Energy Implementation Plan and our work on customer benefit indicators is that it's important to be thoughtful about what you're measuring and thinking about, well, what quality of data do you have access to? What do you think the data, when you step back, is telling you as you measure it over time? And so to the extent that there are examples where other utilities have used this data or the Power Council or other places have used it in their analysis or their decision making, that's particularly helpful because then we can learn from that experience. And so those are just things that are top of mind for us as we think about what is reasonable to measure as part of the cost test. So in general, I'm just going to start walking through this and then we'll go one by one. In green are the elements that we feel reasonably confident we can monetize and provide that output in the cost test. So those are the rate impacts that are specifically called out in the rule language for electric and for gas. Then there's the revenue requirement on the electric and the gas side with the social cost of greenhouse gas included and with it not included. We also, the social cost of greenhouse gas emissions itself, covering the box in the bottom left corner, is something that we can show as a direct modeling output in dollars. And then we believe we can monetize certain host customer impacts. And so we'll talk about that about 2 slides from now. And we'll be interested in your input on whether that's a reasonable way to look at it at a portfolio level. So that's the monetized category. In the category of what we can quantitatively measure, in blue, we have the other environmental category. And what we're proposing would be that we would reflect other emissions besides greenhouse gas emissions, so namely NOx, SOx, and PM 2.5. And then we have several societal impacts that we think are already addressed to some extent, as was discussed a little bit with Lauren and with Megan, either in our underlying planning assumptions or in the modeling itself. And so we'll step through each one of those as we make our way through the slides. And then in orange, we have 2 societal impacts that we're not quite sure how to categorize yet. For the risk reduction premium, we're unsure what to measure that isn't already embedded in our modeling analysis because we're assuming the CCA ceiling price in all of our scenarios. So that's when we're looking for some input. The language is both specific and I would say a little bit vague in the rule in terms of it links it specifically to CCA. And so we're not quite sure what else we might capture that the CCA ceiling price doesn't already account for, but we welcome your thoughts on that. And then for economic development, that's another one where we're not sure what should be measured, but we can share one idea on that. And then finally, we have the other fuels, which we have categorized as not applicable. Under the rules, it's defined as any fuel sold by the utility and then specifies fuels like propane, wood, gasoline, and diesel. And since we're not in the business of selling those fuels, we categorize that one as not applicable for now. So I do see Dennis's hand up. So Dennis, if you want to ask a question now, I'm happy to stop.
Kara, I think it might have been from before,
Oh.
but Dennis, feel free to jump in.
Oh, okay, sure. Kind of just starting off, it's kind of a two-parter, just about societal impacts. And the first really is, how do you compare a qualitative observation with a monetized / quantitative measure while decision-making, understanding that you may have to give one to reduce the other. So the second part of this is, again, is there a monetary value or other measure assigned to a severity level, number of persons affected, or projected sustained negative effects? So I kind of leave it right there. So two-part question, and just asking more or asking, are those the things that could be thought of in making those assignments to make decisions once we get through the model?
Thank you, Dennis. I mean, I think those are great and big questions. And my initial thought is, I don't think we know yet how we're going to analyze these different impacts that are some that are quantitative, some that are monetized, and some that are qualitative just yet. I think we'll be able to kind of work with you all on, and that's really where the decision framework comes in, right? Like the cost test feeds a broader overarching decision framework. And I think that we'll be able to bring you more ideas of how that could work once we get a little further in defining what these elements are, right? And we can start applying them to some tangible results. So, our first conversation will be where you all will see some results is in May when we start discussing the reference case. And I'm hopeful as we progress through the summer, we'll be in more of a place where we can think about how that will work. I think I'm more touching on your first question. Your second question might have eluded me a little bit, but I get the vein of what you're asking, Dennis, which I think is really just how this is going to work in application. And I think we're going to have to continue to have conversations with you all on what does that look like and what will we be able to do in this first ISP versus what might we mature in the second or the third ISP as we learn more. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's dive into the slide by slide if there aren't any more questions, Annie. I am not paying attention to chat because I'm not very good at doing 3 things at once, but or just 2. So if we could go to the next slide, we'll start talking about rate impacts.
Well, hold on. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kara, to interrupt. Lauren, did you want to ask that question? And it looks like y'all are just having.
Oh, I'll just be real quick. Okay, so I guess some things that come up for me in terms of risk reduction is, specifically demand side resources like energy efficiency and demand response that kind of reduce the risk of fuel price increases, future fuel price increases. So that stuff is not captured, right, by CCA ceiling price. And then, there's sort of inherent risk in having to go out to market to try to get supply side resources. I mean, we saw an example of this, recently when Puget was like outbid for a fully permitted, solar project in Oregon that went to Amazon. And so I would say, whatever we can do to like reduce load, reduces the risk that we're going to not be able to secure the clean supply side resources that we need. So I guess I would look for some way to kind of capture that. Like I said, I don't know what the perfect way of doing that is, but that's what I think we're trying to get at here.
Oh, and Carrie, we can't hear you again.
Ah,
Oh, now we can.
I don't know. Apologies. So all I said was thank you, Lauren, for that feedback, and we'll take that back and consider it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Kara. And you can keep going. That question just got put in there very last minute. So feel
No,
free to
no
keep going.
worries. Okay, my mic is still starting to make green signs, so we'll just hope it keeps working. So rate impacts, I think this is pretty straightforward, but for the electric rate impacts, we're proposing to measure the forecasted estimated change in electric rates annually and to measure that as a KW change. And then similarly on the gas side, measuring the estimated change in gas rates annually as a dollar per therm change. And so we'll be able to discuss our methodology for this in more detail at a future meeting when we really walk through the forecasted rate impacts. We'll break out for you what assumptions are underlying that. For now, I would just note that we're really viewing this as the rate impacts that are specifically associated with the resources and the actions that are outlined in the ISP. So not all rate impacts that you might see, like, for example, in PSE's general rate case, which might cover activities that are wholly outside the resource planning world that is the ISP. So just making that footnote, but our thought is really it's around the impacts of the plan as it would get implemented over time. Next slide, please. And then specifically, then we have the electric utility revenue requirement and the gas utility revenue requirement that we also will monetize through this work. It's a direct modeling output in dollars. This is this is consistent with the past work we've done in IRPs. So each portfolio that the model generates will give an estimated cost of delivering that portfolio, and that will be reflected in the plan and in this part of the cost test. Okay, moving to the next slide. So here we have a combination of a couple of monetized and then the quantitative other environmental. So for host customer impacts, we're curious what you all think of this one. I mean, one way we could measure this categorically, and this host customer impacts isn't specifically defined in the rule language, is we could measure the cost to customers for electrification or other demand side measures. So think of a heat pump purchase. We could measure what we estimated was the direct cost to that customer for going out and purchasing and having installed that heat pump. Now that doesn't necessarily capture the whole picture, but it captures that cost side of going and procuring the heat pump and installing it. There are also other societal costs and benefits that we can consider in the host customer impacts that are already embedded in some of our analysis. And those are the non-energy impacts, which for those of you that have been part of the conservation conversation for a while with the Conservation Resource Advisory Group, know that those play a role in our conservation potential assessment for energy efficiency and demand response. And they're considered really at the individual measure level for resources that go into that modeling. So those values of the NEIs can impact the final resource selection for what energy efficiency measures, and their value in the model and what gets chosen. This one is tricky. We'll look into whether there's a way we can isolate and consolidate some of the values to look at it at a broader portfolio level. But it's not clear to us right now whether that's actually a reasonable and achievable thing to be able to pull out of our modeling work for this one. But if we can't do that, we'll at least explain how the model considers those impacts at the measure level, which is a lot of what our energy efficiency friends do, and have that as part of the cost test and the decision framework write-up. So that's a little bit on host customer. For greenhouse gas emissions, this is something we've measured before. We would measure the greenhouse gas emissions associated with all the resources that are in the portfolio. And it really is it would be a direct output from the modeling. reflected in dollars, which is applying that established value for the social cost of greenhouse gas emissions that came from CETA, I believe, that's reflected in the UTC's rules. So that's the last one in the monetized category. And then for other environmental, I think I mentioned this previously, we're proposing to measure other emissions besides greenhouse gas emissions, and the three that come to mind in particular are NOx, SOx, and PM 2.5, and that's information that we have available as an output reflecting the tons of those emissions. So I'll pause there, see if there's any comments or questions or feedback on these three before we keep going. We have a few more, but I just want to stop for a second.
Sure. There were a couple things in the chat. I'll just
Okay.
read them out loud for you. One from JP. How would utility impacts internalize the potential benefits and financing costs due to lower risks?
That's a great question. Do you have any ideas there, JP, on how we might capture that? I really do feel like with this host customer one, we are capturing a aspect, but maybe not the things that we're not capturing with this. So I'd love your thoughts if you want to come off mute and share any ideas there, that'd be great.
Yeah, it is a thorny issue. I believe in the past when I tried this maybe half a decade ago for a similar context where migrating from fossil fuel-based assets to renewable assets brought a bunch of reduced risks. We tried just different financing rates for the assets. I think we tried some banking information that we found and insurance information. This is certainly something that could benefit from a connection with, financiers or financial entities in general that might help translate reduced risks in basis points for financing, such that you have a certain capital cost and a certain equity cost, and you can translate in reduced amounts, and that of course reduces the earning requirement. It can certainly be quantified and monetized, but I believe that retaining an expert in that field is the best approach for this.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. That's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think I only have a few more minutes for this section, so if there aren't any more questions right now, let's move to the next slide. I will try to pick up the pace a little bit, which I'm not very good at, but I will try. So here are the three that are bucketed in the qualitative category, which are, and they really all are thematically related to one another, and that's reliability, resilience, and security of supply. None of these elements are defined in the rule language itself, like most of the other elements we discussed before. So this is a starting point. These are some initial thoughts on how we might be able to define some of these things and measure them. Really starting from an important core premise for PSE, which is that we need to be planning for the entire system in a way that ensures we will have a safe and reliable system. That's a core priority for us. So there are federal and state laws and regulations we have to comply with at many different levels in our planning analysis to ensure reliability. And then if we have a portfolio that doesn't meet all those standards, it is not a viable portfolio from our perspective for us to pursue. So on reliability, we propose measuring the ability to maintain a consistent and dependable supply of energy based on federal standards and industry best practices. So there are some examples here. I'll speak to them briefly. And then, of course, if there's interest in diving down further, we can. So for our electric supply, we plan our system so it meets the LOLE planning reserve margin. So that's one aspect that we often talk about with you in our RA work. We also have certain gas supply planning standards that we meet, such as the 1 in 50, which is designing the system so we can meet load on that coldest day that's likely to experience once in 50 years. And for us, that's planning to a 13-degree Fahrenheit day. And then we also need to plan our electric system to meet FERC and NERC reliability standards, which is what we do. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but we are looking at a number of the sources that Lisa provided. Yeah, I did mention that. So we're still looking at those, having our team dig into those. There may be some metrics there outside of the examples that we provided that we want to pursue further. So for resilience, we propose defining resilience as the ability to withstand and recover from disruptions. And again, this is an area where there's a number of things that we could consider for resilience that we capture in either our planning activities or our compliance activities. So we have our resource adequacy analysis that considers forced outages. I mentioned FERC and NERC standards that we plan to, they support reliability, but also resiliency. On the gas side, we have the PHMSA regulations that really do help promote from on the gas safety side resilience. And then there are a number of federal, state, and local standards that we meet that also are in the vein of supporting greater resiliency. So most of this is just us letting you know that there's a lot that we already consider and embed into our planning work in this space. At the same time, we're very open to your ideas on if there are aspects that we are missing that sort of capture at a portfolio level, what might we be looking for reliability or resilience. And then for security of supply, as a starting point, we propose defining it as having a consistent and reliable access to essential resources. And one way we could measure this is to look at the volatility of our fuel supply and firm electric supply. So on the gas side, we plan for firm pipeline capacity to serve our gas load. On the electric side, we plan for firm transmission for our electric system. And then we also plan for firm pipeline capacity to provide fuel to our thermal generating resources. So we kind of have it in both ways. And then another layer that sort of supports security of supply and resiliency is we plan to have oil backup for our thermal resources for 3 days in the event of an outage. So there's an unlikely event of an outage on our system, we have that oil backup on site. So that's another thing that we plan for that is already embedded in the work that we do. I'll just pause there before moving to the next slide. Looks like Quinn has his hand up.
Yeah, hi, Kara. I'm curious about security of supply, maybe not touching on like access to markets. And in that, it kind of works both ways in that if your volatility of fuel and electricity is limited in some aspects, your aspect to markets kind of covers that.
Yeah, thank you, Quinn, for that suggestion. We can look at that aspect a bit more. Yeah, I do see your point there. Thank you for that. Do you have anything in particular that you might suggest that we measure or just more the observation?
More of the observation.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, and then I see John's hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering about the kind of the treatment of like firm transmission supply. I understand, obviously that's nice. There's also, some different transmission products on the market on a more short-term basis, and there's a lot of challenges, getting firm transmission. I'm not arguing any of those or kind of like casting aspersions upon putting it, that consideration in the analysis. But one thing I was wondering is how do you consider that when firm transmission does to some extent, how would I say, like there is an interplay between your transmission supply to a resource and then certain other resources like batteries, and having that potentially like firm up a resource supply depending on what transmission product you have. I just kind of was wondering how you all are thinking about that, because this seems like is a little bit separate part of the analysis other than the analytical piece. So I was wondering if there's an overlap there.
Thank you, John. Elizabeth, would you like to chime in on this one?
Elizabeth.
Or maybe Philip.
Looks like she's there.
Oops. Oh, there we go. Okay, are you able to hear me?
Yes,
Yeah, you can.
All right. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna apologize. I was getting distracted by comments in the chat. So I think the question was around the firm transmission supply. Is that correct?
Yeah, Elizabeth, I think I was mostly wondering kind of what piece the firm transmission kind of like requirement played here versus in the consideration of kind of the quantitative analysis where you might compare other resources that could potentially locally, not exactly firm up your transmission, but potentially be a sink for like a generation resource. So I guess what I'm thinking of is like for like hybrid, solar plus battery resources, you might be able to take a lower quality transmission supply, or like you lower quality transmission product that might not just be a firm product. I'm just trying to think creatively about some of the newer resources that might show up, especially in some of the later years of your planning. And if there's an interplay there, or if the requirement of a firm transmission supply is a necessity here versus something that you would just look at straight up in the quantitative analysis.
So you are going down the same path we've been going down. This is actually something we're building into the models. So what we're trying to do is create these zones, these transmission zones with availability of transmission, firm transmission into these zones. But we're allowing multiple resources to be added. So essentially what you would be doing is that you can be overbuilding for your transmission given these co-location of resources to optimize your interconnections. So if you have like a wind and a solar and a battery located together, they can be optimized together to use your interconnection and use your transmission. And in that way, you'll be optimizing out the resources without what you have of available transmission. So what we're going into the model with is kind of a very limited transmission view. And then we're going to be expanding out some sensitivities around the transmission. What if we can get more transmission? What if we can do more builds? What if we have these limited builds, looking at what if we putting more resources into kind of what would be the PSE zone versus these other zones of transmission. So we'll be able to kind of get into these different questions around the transmission supply, and what's happening there as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. Excited to hear more about that. Thanks.
Great. And then Megan, I was gonna ask if we could hold questions till we get through the last few slides, but is something you need to ask quickly now?
No, I can wait a few slides.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just trying to keep us on time. So Kara, I'll let you go ahead and keep us going for the next few slides, and then we'll pause for questions once we get to the next section break.
Okay, sounds great. So let's go to the next slide then. Let's do that.
And you're quiet, Kara.
Oh, come on. All right. And then it's green again. Can you hear me better now?
Can hear you. It's still quiet.
Shoot. Okay.
There, that's better, I think.
I did absolutely nothing, but okay. I'm gonna hope that that we're done with that. So okay. How will we measure? Is this the right? Is there one? Did we skip a slide? Yeah, I need to cover this one briefly. So two more on the qualitative category. This definition of equity should look familiar to everyone. The rule language specifically references the CEIP rule language around the 10-year Clean Energy Action Plan, how specific actions are consistent with the long-term strategy. So we feel like this one is pretty well defined. Of course, what we'll need to do is really specifically demonstrate some of the things that we're measuring from an equity perspective. And some examples could be how we measure benefits, or how benefits are flowing towards named communities, as well as reducing burdens, and also how treatment of customers in deepest need are a couple of areas that we could consider there as building on the prior work in this space. And then health and safety is the last one in the qualitative bucket. One way we could define that is that the portfolio needs to meet all of our existing health and safety requirements. And so there are some examples such as having the necessary permit approvals to meet air quality standards, ensuring we meet all the applicable workplace safety and other safety standards. So that's there for consideration, and we'll see what other ideas come forward. Next slide, please. We talked a little bit about risk reduction already, and the rule language says it needs to account for allowance ceiling prices approved by ecology. So we still have this one in the undetermined bucket. Lauren, I appreciate some of your the feedback you provided earlier. We'd need to think some more about what we would be measuring specifically for that, but really appreciate your observations. And then for economic development, this term it is also not defined in the rules, but one way we could consider it is just looking at job creation. And that's something we could measure the estimated jobs by portfolio build, which really might align nicely with the direction we're headed with one of our customer benefit indicators in the conversations we've had with our equity advisory group, and sort of, adapting the metrics for that one in a way that we feel like will be more meaningful and get us better data over time. So next slide, please. Discussion questions, and I think we've been kind of taking some of this feedback throughout. What I want to highlight is that as I mentioned at the beginning, we want to take some of these conversations. We want to go deeper with you next month and reflect on the feedback we hear today, whatever comes through in the feedback report. We think that we also want to take this conversation to the EAG, and we are planning to in March, as well as the CRAG. So we had listed here, equity is a very natural and obvious one that we would take to the EAG, and we welcome that continued conversation with them. They were the very first to help us with that when they were stood up in 2021. Economic development is another one that we've talked with them before that we may want to continue going deeper with. And then the CRAG, host customer impacts, is another one where we're still like, ooh, is this the right thing to measure? What other ideas do you have? And we thought the CRAG might be a natural place to have that conversation as well. Welcome other thoughts from all of you on where we might focus. I think that's it for me, Annie, and I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Kara. And looks like we've got some conversations going on in the chat, so that's helpful. Thanks, Brian and Megan, for moving things along there. Are there other questions or comments people wanted to ask? There was one thing I don't think we got a chance for in the chat from JP. If not, yeah, JP.
Yeah, I have a question that's actually not the one that I put in the chat, but it might be more general and appropriate for this last little bit. Is the purpose of the cost tests to actually conduct a benefit or actually produce a benefit cost ratio for the portfolios and eventually look at the ones that have either above one or prioritize them in a certain way? Because it's not clear to me that it's very easy, depending on how you set up the analysis, that some costs might turn into benefits because it might be savings compared to, say, a baseline portfolio. So some of the elements that are offered here are more clearly costs, and others look more like benefits. But I can see how some of the costs could be framed as benefits depending on how you structure them. So just wondering, is the whole purpose of this effort to produce a benefit cost ratio?
Yeah, thank you, JP. The rule language isn't really clear on that front, on what was sort of intended for this cost test framework. I would observe that the ISP statute didn't change any of our existing cost effectiveness tests that we use in our different planning areas as PSE. And so we aren't reviewing it right now as a benefit cost test per se. We're reviewing it as a broader, consideration framework that has monetized quantitative and qualitative elements. And I think the art form is still figuring out how all those pieces come together. And you heard, Quinn's question earlier on asking, well, are things going to be weighted? I don't know the answer to that yet. We would welcome your ideas and thoughts on how, as we digest this conversation and come back and get closer to defining what are we measuring in these different areas, hearing your thoughts on how this all comes together in a cohesive way. But on its face, to me, it's not feeling like a benefit cost test. And if there's anyone else from the PSE side that wants to offer a different perspective, we're still iterating on what this ought to look like, and looking forward to the feedback from this side as well.
All right, but that would mean that from a decision-making perspective, at some point you would look at the combination of lowest cost and better qualitative or quantitative impacts of some sorts, without even talking about weighting them. But the cost, the monetized costs that you're going to look here, those will be able to rank, and looking at the lower cost options might be more, at least a starting point, right?
I think you're on the right track. I mean, that is how we're thinking about it. I think it's hard to refine it much further until we start seeing what some of the results look like. But I think that is generally the way we're thinking about it right now. Thank you.
Okay. And I'll withhold my question on resilience and reliability just to not hoard the microphone.
Thanks, JP. Okay, I think we've got through most of the questions in the chat and with hands up. So, and we're right on time. So thank you so much, Kara, for quickly going through those last couple of slides. Really appreciate it. And just appreciate you being here and helping us go through all of this really incredible information. So what we can do, I think, is wrap up this section, if that's okay, Karen?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
Thanks
great.
everybody so much.
Yes, thank you. And we'll move, segue into our next conversation, which is focused on ISP iterative analysis overview with Jennifer Colson from PSE. So Jennifer, over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, good afternoon. So we can go into the next slide. So the purpose of this part of the presentation is really to preview the iterative analysis concept and answer any of your questions. I will be handing it over to Cadmus Group after I do a couple of slides to dive into some details. And the outcome of this is really that we get a general understanding of the iterative analysis that's occurring for our first integrated system plan. The next slide. So this is a really high level graphic, and I recognize that on the next, when I go into the next slide, I'm going to do a really specific example for you, but this really follows the program structure on the ISP graphics that we've shown you to date. So recognizing that people learn different ways, we're going to try two different visuals for you today. So we're going to start with the arrow on the left, the ISP scenarios. This is really those scenarios are defined different environments in the future, and we're developing different gas and electric load forecasts that correspond to those scenario definitions. And as we move to the center circle, that's encompassing the gas and electric customer needs, priorities, and our choices. You can see there's several different circles here. So I'll start on the top left of your screen. That's the gas supply optimization. So as we pull together a portfolio for each scenario, we're running all of these circles for you in different ways. And so the gas supply optimization portfolio is being run, and you can see there's a dashed line to circle iteration on the bottom left of your screen, which is a gas T&D system. So we're analyzing that gas forecast within the gas supply portfolio and also within the gas T&D system. And there's some interdependencies and iteration that could occur based on the results between those two buckets. And then as you move to the right, on the bottom right of your screen, you have the electric T&D system. And you can see, again, there's a gray dashed line that shows you the iterative nature in the corresponding work between the gas T&D system and the electric T&D system. And then on the top right of your screen is the electric supply optimization portfolio. Again, iteration is shown there in the gray circles. And that's really what Elizabeth alluded to in the conversation previously about that transmission and all the work they have done with all those generation zones and how they've been iterating back and forth regarding regional and local transmission. That's really high level. And like I said, I'm going to do an example in a moment, but I also wanted to just spend a moment to point out the price responsiveness analysis on the top. So this is looking at the gas and electric rates for each scenario over this planning horizon and identifying based on those projected rates, what are customers likely to do from those price signals. This analysis is really specific to scenario one, because we don't have all the time to do that for every single scenario. So that is really defined in scenario one, which Cadmus Group is here today to talk about with you and how they've approached that in that analysis. And the output of all of this will be a portfolio for each scenario. And we'll have several of these scenarios, as Kara is alluding to fill in that cost test framework. We're also wanted to mention that we see this ISP and the following ISPs as really iterative in nature in themselves in each filing cycle. So this price responsiveness is a really good example. PSE has never produced long-term planning rate analysis before. That hasn't been an output in an IRP, and it is in an ISP. So we're going to have our first crack at that process, this ISP, and we envision that that's going to be an input into the 2030 ISP and so on. And over time, that analysis will get more and more refined and optimized. So before I have too many questions, I'm going to go to the next slide because I think this will make more sense. I'm going to walk through a really specific example, but I wanted to iterate a couple of things based on the conversation we had in January as I tell you this example. So each of these different planning areas has their own model. They're not connected. And that's because, one, we don't have a connected model, but also two, each of these different groups are planning for different aspects of the system. And in doing so, they have different, FERC, NERC, federal, state, local, jurisdictional requirements that they have to adhere to ensure a safe and reliable system. So they're all independent models. However, there were a lot of questions that brought up in the January RPAG regarding inputs and assumptions, and we are also concerned about that. So we've been doing a ton of work to ensure that across the board, our inputs and assumptions are aligned. So if one area is using one input or assumption, that same input and assumption, if it's applied to another area, is the same assumption. So that's been done across the board. A really big component of that is the demand forecast that we're leveraging. So on the far left of your screen, you can see we start with that gas and electric demand forecast. Those are developed together, especially as we talked about these scenarios where we have load shifting between the gas system and the electric system. And so the reduction on the gas system has to correspond to the increase on the electric system, and that is being done in tandem together. And that's what Cadmus will talk about, the process and methodology for how they are developing those increments and decrements. If we take an example of cost-effective electrification, I think that'll be a good way to explain how we're iterating through this process on these bubbles on the screen. So if we have the gas and electric demand forecast as an input, and we put the gas forecast into the gas supply optimization portfolio, we have all of our inputs and assumptions, we model it, and we get an output and we see cost-effective electrification. We would look at that result and say, okay, so how much electrification are we seeing? When does it occur? Then we would talk to the gas T&D side. We'd say, here's the electrification we're seeing. This is when it would occur, and here's about the volume. Are there opportunities on the gas system where this could be targeted electrification to help benefit the gas T&D investments? So the gas T&D system would take that information on top of their already identified NPAs and run that through their analysis and determine if there are opportunities there. While they're doing that, they're going to talk to the electric T&D side and say, here are the areas of my system of which I believe we can reduce and electrify customers. Here's the corresponding electric system. Can the electric system take this load? Is there additional cost that we need to account for in our NPA calculation or a cost-effective calculation to ensure that we're reflecting the true costs and benefits of this conversion? And the electric team may suggest a different place on the system. They may say, actually, no, that's great. Let's do it, vice versa. So there's some iteration between there. And then as we get to the electric supply, if the electric T&D has increased load on certain aspects of the system, and now we need to change how much load is coming into our system at different points, because our system is a north, mid, south along the Puget Sound. So the electric supply may need to alter their portfolio and how the transmission system is being leveraged in that to accommodate those additional loads or changes in that example. So all of this information would be run for every single scenario, and each one would create a portfolio on the right-hand side of your screen. Even in the extreme examples where we're electrifying a lot in scenarios 4, scenario 3, where you have a lot of electrification, less gas load, this gas supply and gas T&D iteration still very much occurs, if not possibly even more in some instances, right? Because it's even bigger amounts that they need to take into consideration over different time periods that they'll need to accommodate and try to identify how to best optimally design the system to ensure it's still safe and reliable, but also reducing costs in the system effectively. So that's kind of when we take a step back over the full ISP, how we're iterating through all of this. And so I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I'm not seeing questions yet. Oh, I do see Quinn's hand just popped up.
Hi, Jennifer. I am a little curious. You mentioned electrification as the example. Here, I'm curious at what point you're also considering conservation within this. Is it at the beginning and then you're just kind of iterating through that as well? And like, is that model considering the interplay between conservation and electrification?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So for the reference case in this scenarios, you'll notice the models I have here are not the customer aspects because the gas T&D and electric T&D, like conservation has an impact on the system, the T&D system pretty significantly on where it is, right? So we've incorporated conservation in the gas and electric demand forecast on the far left of your screen. And that's how it's being incorporated. So it's already incorporated in the forecast in these scenarios, but we are testing different levels of that conservation and some sensitivities. And conservation, so in scenario 4 or 5, I'll have the scenarios in a moment and show you to remind you, conservation potential increases with the electric side as the electric system grows. So it would be a different level for each one, but yeah.
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Okay, we'll get into the good stuff. Okay, so next slide are the fun stuff with Cadmus. So I wanted to just take a moment to reintroduce the scenarios again. We talked about them last month. Cadmus will be referring to these, so that's why we just wanted to make sure we all remember today what these are. Today, we're going to focus on that building electrification column, and Taylor's going to walk you through how Cadmus has leveraged these definitions to develop those anchor decks on the gas and electric system. We did get your feedback on the large load requests and adding more details and the EV adoption rates. And so we're bringing that back to you in March. We didn't forget. We'll have all the right people to talk to you about their assumptions and details there. So just to reorient everyone on these scenarios. And again, we're really focused on that building electrification column today. Scenario 1 is starting in 2030, building electrification based on equipment failure and market adoption rate with an incentive. So this is looking at customers' willingness to transition based on cost over the study period. And so we're using the rates from the 2020, Stipulation O 2023 decarbonization study. That's the only place that we've done that before. So we're going to use that as our starting point. This will all go through once we get the new load forecast based on the customer's willingness to transition from electric to gas, we would run those through our models and then have new output rates, right? Scenario 2 is that new one where we're starting in 2030, electrifying buildings at a pace that brings emissions of both the utilities below the utilities' proportional share of the state greenhouse gas emission goals. This is really isolating building electrification. Large load requests and EVs are not changing. Scenario 3 is very similar to scenario 2. However, we're constraining it by equipment failure. So we know from prior analysis that we're not going to quite make that proportional share of the state greenhouse gas emission goal without retiring equipment early, meaning as a customer, you would have to replace your furnace before it died. So in scenario 3, we're constraining that. So we probably wouldn't hit that line. And then scenario 3 is also increasing large loads and EVs. So you can see that reflected in the shading of the columns. And scenario 4 is the same as scenario 2. So it's unconstrained, meaning we're going to hit those utilities proportional share of the state's greenhouse gas emissions line without any regard to when an appliance has failed. So we're going to potentially rip out a furnace before it needs to be replaced, and also increasing large load requests and EVs.
Okay, I see Katie's hand up.
Thank you. I realized I have a question on the previous slide, but I have one on this slide as well. So Up to you.
You want to go? We can go back and then come.
Okay. This question might be clear to everyone else, but I just wonder if you could explain from the previous slide how exactly this planning is different than PSE was conducting gas and electric planning alongside each other and incorporated within each other, informing each other for the IRP versus this first ISP, just to make it blatantly clear, like what exactly is different in terms of how they inform each other.
Yeah, if you want to go back one slide. So in a traditional integrated resource plan, there was the gas supply, so the bubble in your far left, and the electric supply, the bubble in the far right. To your point, they were done and done together generally, but I wouldn't say that all of the inputs and assumptions were set up to be consistent all of the time because they were solving different challenges and had different rules and requirements. So while they both could have evaluated similar sensitivities and scenarios, they weren't always 100% in alignment, if that's helpful. And also in an integrated system plan, we are also incorporating the gas T&D and electric T&D system in this. So previously, electric and gas T&D were incorporated in the IRP as attachment K or appendix. I shouldn't say that. It's a different one every time we file. So I won't reference an appendix because it'll be wrong. But there was an appendix that referenced our plans for electric T&D and gas TD, I think more specifically in the 23 analysis. But that was pretty high level and wasn't necessarily incorporated into our analysis as it is here. We're gathering all of the outputs and modeling each load forecast through every scenario into the electric and gas T&D models, engineering models as well, to gather infrastructure costs and investments over time for the 20 years. That prior analysis was only 5 or 10 years, depending on whatever requirement was reflected in the IRP. Is that helpful?
That is helpful. So just while we're talking about T&D, is there a way that you fold in things like grid enhancing technologies to see how they would impact the efficiency on the current system, cost savings over the long run, to defer, long lead time investments in new transmission infrastructure? Is that something that falls into this graphic as well?
Yeah, that's a great point. So the electrics T&D team does analyze, oh my gosh, I just had a brain. Grid modernization opportunities in their analysis, and they do incorporate that in their planning and investments. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for tackling that. And the next slide, my question is just about the reference case.
Yeah.
I'm curious because it says that it considers currently planned projects, and I'm wondering if that means across the entire planning horizon.
Can you go to the next slide, please?
So reference case, current building, pilots, and projects. So is that for the entire planning horizon, the reference case is only considering the projects that are currently planned?
Correct. So the ones that are currently funded and going forward.
Okay.
And then the portfolio, would optimize around with all the other inputs on other opportunities based on how that shakes out.
Okay, so the reference case doesn't anticipate any change from what's currently planned across a long planning horizon.
Yeah, it's not forced into the demand forecast. It's offered as a resource alternative as an option in the optimization.
Okay. Thank you. That's it from me.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, good questions.
And hey, Lauren, I see your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to clarify. So for the reference case, like on the supply side, it includes PSE's current system, right?
Yes.
And doesn't include necessarily like planned stuff that isn't built yet.
Correct. Unless it's,
Okay.
yeah. unless it's an
So-
acquired, recently acquired resource or something.
Can you tell us specifically, we will at some point be informed about what specific resources that are currently in that category are included or not included in the reference case?
Yeah, we can do some digging to see if we have that somewhere already, or if not, we do plan to bring the reference case in May. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I'm just sensitive to the fact that it's been a while since we've seen an IRP, and there have been a number of resources that have been announced. So that would be our interest in understanding what, if any of those are going to get looked at. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. We'll make sure we add that and clarify that in May. Okay, I think, should we keep going, Annie? Okay, so.
Yeah, and just so you know, we are a little bit over time, so if we can wrap this section pretty soon, that would be great.
Yeah, I think I'm covered what I need to.
Okay.
I'm gonna hand it over. I guess Annie, you can.
Yes, happy to hand it over. So thank you so much, Jennifer. Thanks for those questions, folks. And with that, we'll go ahead and quickly segue over to the Cadmus group presentation, and we'll have Taylor take it from here. And Taylor, yes, we're scheduled right now to try to wrap this section by 3 so we can have time for public comment from between 3 and 3:15.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you, Annie. Thank you, Jen. My name's Taylor Bettine with Cadmus. As Jen mentioned, I'll be talking about the building electrification analysis through the lens of the building electrification impact tool that Cadmus has developed to support PSE's integrated electric and gas system planning. So next slide, please. I'll give a quick overview of the tool and also the key topics that I'm going to talk you through today. So this is an Excel-based electrification scenario analysis tool. We take most of the, if not all of the baseline assumptions and inputs from CPA's base case forecast, CPA being the conservation potential assessment. So the takeaway there is that this tool's in line with the assumptions and the inputs from that other analysis. The goal of the tool is to predict electrification uptake over time, with the key output from the tool being annual saturations for electric and gas appliances. So increasing electric saturation, decreasing gas saturation. Yeah, key topics. I'll go into a little more detail on baseline assumptions. I'll discuss the electrification pathways that we are modeling for gas appliances. We'll discuss the granularity of the analysis. We have a flowchart that illustrates the iterative modeling framework and where this analysis, this tool fits into that process. And then the rest, the last 3 items there are really focused around the adoption methodology built into the tool. So how do we determine what the electrification uptake is? And we'll cover that and really items like 1 through 5 here are applicable to all 4 scenarios. We are going to hone in a bit on scenario 1. For items 6 and 7, they're really centered around the customer decision model that underlies and drives electrification in scenario 1, just as opposed to scenarios 2 through 4, which are driven by policy more than customer decisions. So if you go to the next slide, please, we can dive right into the baseline assumptions. As I mentioned, we're in line with the input assumptions used in the conservation potential assessment. So inputs like energy consumption of gas and electric appliances, effective useful lifetimes of these equipment, costs, so on and so forth. Also the saturation of these the starting saturations of these various equipment types, the fuel shares, that sort of thing. And of course, we are accounting for any and all applicable federal, state, and local codes and standards as well. There are some additional inputs that we supplement with the inputs from the 2023 decarbonization study. So as part of that study, there are a series of contractor interviews that were conducted. Those have information on costs, equipment costs for the electric side of equipment, so a lot of heat pumps, as well as conversion costs like panel upgrade costs. Additionally, we're using some of the heat pump performance research and the heat pump load shapes from that study as well. And then, as Jen mentioned earlier, we are also using the rate forecast that ultimately PSE developed as part of that decarbonization study. Next slide, please. All right, so now I'm going to talk through the electrification pathways that we modeled for various gas appliances. So we've got residential equipment on the left, commercial on the right. There's a lot of acronyms on this slide. I'll just kind of talk through each of them as we get there. And I'm going to go through the list here, starting on the left with residential. So for a home that has an existing gas boiler, we're modeling that home would convert to a ductless heat pump system, where there would be multiple ductless heat pumps to meet the heating needs of the home. And that could be a normal ductless heat pump or a cold climate ductless heat pump. Could also be what we call here a hybrid ductless heat pump. And what we mean by hybrid in this context is that it has a gas backup still. So maybe that boiler is, you repair the boiler, have it run during the coldest days, or maybe they buy a counterfactual boiler in addition to the heat pump installs, again, to serve as a backup on the coldest days. Now, those hybrid options, we're only modeling those through 2030, after which point we aren't allowing those anymore. And it's only the full conversion to all electric after that point. So that's the pathway for homes with boilers. We've actually modeled the same pathway for homes that have existing gas furnaces where the ducts aren't in good repair. So that can be a challenge. And kind of in order to install a central heat pump, you'd need some additional ductwork to be done. So often those cases, or at least we're assuming that those cases, they would electrify to a decentralized ductless heat pump system of some sort as well. For other furnaces, so furnaces with ducts that are in good repair, we assume that those electrify to centralized or ducted air source heat pump, or cold climate air source heat pump, or one with a gas backup, again through 2030. In terms of, so there's two entries here. There's furnace without existing central air conditioner and furnace with existing central air conditioner. The only difference in how we model those is on the counterfactual costs. So the measure cost is obviously the cost of the heat pump. The counterfactual cost is the cost of the furnace replacement. And then if they already have a central air conditioner, we include the cost of a central air conditioner replacement as well in that counterfactual cost. And that's the only difference between those two situations. Moving along, for homes with their primary heat source being gas room heaters, it's going to be a very small slice of the pie, but for those, we assume those electrify to ductless heat pump systems. And that's all the HVAC for residential. Then we get into, I think, what are pretty straightforward conversions for these other appliances. So for cooking, we have them converting to standard, the standard electric equivalent of whatever the gas is here. So gas oven to electric oven, gas cooktop to electric cooktop. Gas dryer, again, similar idea, convert over to an electric dryer. I do specify here non-heat pump. And for all of these, they're actually converting over into a standard efficiency piece of equipment. So it's a standard efficiency dryer. At the bottom there, this will be standard efficiency water heaters. And I did just want to make that clarification. So that's the electric conversions. On the commercial side, pretty simple. Whether for buildings that have boilers or furnaces, we assume those convert to air source heat pumps. For commercial space that's heated primarily with gas room heaters, we assume that they install ductless heat pumps to meet those loads. And then straightforward conversions for cooking and water heating. Now, something I want to mention here is that all these scenarios assume electrification of end-use equipment at the equipment's end of life. So that assuming that customers are waiting for equipment failure before making the decision to electrify or purchase another replacement gas system. And we do our analysis on an end-use level. So the analysis doesn't tell us, for example, when a particular home fully converts and no longer has or needs any gas service. All we know is, what portion of gas furnaces have electrified by a certain date for a group of customers. So it's we can't point to any particular point in time when, this exact number of gas accounts have been closed, for example. So just wanted to clarify that. And then caveat on the end of life replacement is that scenarios 2 and 4, one of their assumptions, their key assumption, I would say, is that they are unconstrained by equipment failure, meaning that in addition to replacing on failure, there's additional electrification assumed as early retirements of still functioning gas equipment in order to meet the conditions of those scenarios. All right, and if you go to the next slide, I'm not seeing any questions yet, but feel free to stop me if those pop up. I'll talk through the granularity of analysis. I talked a little bit about this on the prior slide, but I'll reiterate here. So we don't model individual buildings or sites. We model groups of buildings or groups of customers that share similar characteristics. So I've listed those characteristics here, but just as an example of like one bucket of customers would be like residential single family customers in King County that are vulnerable population or named population, existing buildings and combo customers, right? So every household or building that meets that combination of metrics, we model those all in one group. So, it's going to be like 100,000 or more customers in that bucket, somewhere around there. And the granularity that we model this at, that's again in alignment with the conservation potential assessment. Yeah, on the let me start that sentence over again. The impact of electrification and how that's captured, that depends, how that's captured in how it affects PSE's system, that depends on the customer type. So an electric-only customer, that's going to result in an increase in PSE's electric sales. Gas-only customer, that'll result in a decrease in the gas sales. And then a customer that has both electric and gas service, obviously both sides of that impact would be hitting PSE's systems. Okay, next slide, please. So this flowchart shows, and I'll kind of talk through it, but this shows how PSE and Cadmus work together to iterate through a single planning cycle, and then how the output of the last planning cycle, which is the decarb study, the key output there is that rate forecast tied to those electrification predictions. That's an input into this cycle. Once we complete this cycle, we'll have a new set of rates that we can feed into the next cycle, and that's the iterative nature of it. But I'll step through this. So in general, this flow applies to all the scenarios. There is one particular call out for the scenario 1, which is really on the rates input there. And this is almost like a footnote, like scenarios 2 through 4, because of how they're defined, they're policy driven. So the rates actually don't really make an impact because of the assumptions of the scenarios. That may not be true in future cycles, but that is true for this cycle. So I'm noting it here. But starting in the top left there with step 0, baseline assumptions and inputs, those feed into step 1, where Cadmus produces the base case forecast using the CPA model. In step 2, Cadmus conducts scenario analysis using the building electrification impact tool, which is what I'm presenting on now. That outputs saturations of electric and gas equipment over time. Those saturations are inputs into our end use forecast model to produce a new load forecast with those electrification saturations now embedded in them. And we do this for each scenario. And we provide to PSE the net electrification impacts from each of those scenarios as well, compared to the base case. So on the electric side, that's the higher hourly electricity from electrification and lower monthly gas on the gas side. In step 4, Cadmus estimates the demand side resource potential for energy efficiency, demand response, and solar for each scenario. And those are, of course, accounting for the downstream effects of electrification. So, in the electrification scenarios, there's now higher electric load than there was in the base case, lower gas load. That's going to be reflected as higher electric conservation, lower gas conservation, for example. In step 5, PSE takes the outputs from steps 3 and 4 provided by Cadmus and loops those into their own load scenario development and ISP analysis. And on the other side of that, in step 6, PSE outputs rate impacts, which in turn inform future ISP cycles represented by step 7 there. And so you can imagine this process repeating again in the next planning cycle after the 2027 ISP, using the output rate impacts from this 2027 ISP cycle.
And hey, Taylor, I have a couple questions for you, if that's okay to pause.
Yep.
Dennis put in the chat, is step 5 where the Aurora system begins?
Yeah, I might tap Jen to step in for that one since that's a PSE step.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so Dennis, you're correct. That's where the ISP analysis in its entirety sits. So that's the Aurora model, the gas optimization model, the Plexos, the gas T&D, electric T&D, and all that. So yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, Jen. I've got Quinn up next, and then I'll go to JP. Quinn?
Yeah, hi Taylor. I'm curious about how the model moves from I see these two arrows on slide or on box 3, one of which sends the impacts of electrification directly to the load scenario, and then one that pulls it through the CPA and then into the load scenario. And I'm curious how the model kind of avoids double counting if that's the case.
Yeah. So that's a good question. The two arrows leaving box 3 are what I'm going to focus on. Those are different things. So the arrow from 3 to 4, um, coming out of step 3 there, that's a new load forecast. So that's not the electrification impacts themselves. It's just like the total load forecast, which serves as the foundation for estimating EE and DR potential. The line that goes straight from box 3 to box 5, that's very specifically the net electrification impacts that PSE uses in their process. And so the only information coming from box 4 to box 5 are the demand side resource potentials. So there's no so box 4 to 5 doesn't have the electrification impacts in terms of like added load or removed load, just the adjusted DSR estimates based on those revised load forecasts.
Thanks, Taylor.
Cool.
And then a question in the chat from JP, shouldn't rate impacts heavily influence electrification? I thought that was implied in Jen's high level diagram. And he means resulting evolving rates, not present day rates.
Yeah, that's a great question. Jen, I'm curious if you want to jump in there. I know we had some back and forth about how to account for that. I'm happy to address it, but curious if you had wanted to take a first pass.
Yeah, it'll be a fun quiz. So these are long-term rates that are projected out of the decarbonization study. So to your point, JP, that is in box 0, and for scenario 1, that would be used from a customer's perspective regarding their energy costs if they would be they would decide to transition from a gas customer to an electric. It's for only the scenario 1. The other scenarios are the policy like must transition versions. Did I understand your question correctly?
Yeah, so that's the part of me that didn't understand is that 0 rate from 2023 decarb study is a schedule, or it's a sort of a vector of rates that change over years depending on certain assumptions in that particular study.
Correct. And that study was looking at electrification over time based on market adoption as well. And so it was, a relatively good starting point from that perspective.
Okay.
And that is on our website.
Okay. So the recommendation would be to compare out of the analysis the step 6 with the step 0 and see how much they diverge. Because if 6, the output rate impact is substantially different from your assumption on the inputs, it might suggest that you might need another iteration because the underlying assumptions for adoption are influencing costs in such a way that rates are differing too much from your original assumption. Whereas if they're relatively close, that validates the exercise. It means that the original assumption is relatively okay. And the decarb study is reflecting roughly the same that this particular ISP is reflecting. So at least presenting those two and how they look, I'm not exactly sure how to move forward, but at least presenting those clearly and comparing them might be a useful exercise.
Yes, we agree.
Nice.
Great. Thanks for pointing that out.
Great, thanks. Okay, and I don't see other questions yet. And Taylor, we've got about 15, little less than 15 minutes on this section. So I'll hand it over to you to keep going.
Yeah, sounds good. I will do that. If you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so yes, this slide and the next couple slides are looking at how the electrification tool decides or predicts, how it estimates electrification uptake. So the top half of the slide there is the high level, very high level formula essentially for how it estimates that. So the number of installations, that would be electrification installs, equals the applicable stock times final annual adoption percentage. So applicable stock there being the number of equipment units that have failed and need to be replaced in a given year. So that is an annual value. And the final annual adoption percentage being the percentage of those applicable stock that will install a given equipment. So an electrification conversion. Now that is pretty high level, but it's useful at this level because that final annual adoption percentage, how we get that number varies between the scenarios. So there's 3 options. The first option is to use our customer decision model, which I'll go into a lot more detail on in the second half of the slide and the next 2 slides. The second option is a mandate assumption that's constrained by equipment failure. And this is the assumption that we used for scenario 3. Basically, the annual adoption percent is assumed to be 100% for mandated equipment. That starts in 2030 in scenario 3. It's a pretty simple assumption. The third option is an early replacement assumption. And that mechanism is that in addition to, above and beyond the mandate assumption, we have a mechanism that estimates how many more replacements are needed each year beyond those replace on failures in order to reduce PSE's combined carbon emissions for electric and gas systems to below an estimated carbon allowance. Jen mentioned earlier the carbon allowance line. So to bring the carbon emissions below that line. I'm not going to go into more detail on the mandate or the early replacement assumptions right now. Just in the interest of time, we're going to focus the rest of the content on the customer decision model that drives electrification uptake in scenario 1. And so that's really what the bottom half of the screen, half of the slide shows as well as the next step of that. How do we estimate the final annual adoption percent for the customer decision modeling? Well, it's really comes down to 3 components. The payback acceptance, the S-curve percent, and the competition share. So customer payback acceptance, that is a value between 0 and 0% and 100%. It represents the highest attainable market share based on, and it is based on project payback period from a customer perspective. So that's really bringing in an economic component to the decision making. And as a simple example, for a payback of 0, that means an investment pays itself off immediately. You'd imagine a very high percentage of the population is willing to make that investment, right? But a longer payback, 20 years, 30 years, maybe longer than the equipment even lasts on average before it needs to be replaced again. A much smaller portion of the population is willing to make that sort of investment based on an economic basis alone. So that's what that component is capturing. The S-curve percentage represents the market diffusion of a technology, and that is independent of project economics. It's also a value between 0 and 100%. That's based on vast diffusion of innovation theory. For those familiar with the council's power plans, the S-curve here is analogous to the ramp rates. So measure ramping from 0% and when it's first introduced to full market saturation. In that paradigm, the payback acceptance is akin to the maximum achievability percentage. The competition share, I'm not going to get into too much detail on, but essentially that represents the portion of decision makers that choose a measure over competing alternatives. So we model multiple efficiencies of equipment. Only one of the customer has to choose one of those efficiencies to install. So, in order to get the accounting right, we need to make sure we share those out. If you go to the next slide, please, I'll go deeper into the S-curve percentage component here. So you can see the formula for the S-curves up in the top right there. There's two coefficients. Coefficient P is the coefficient of innovation, Q is the coefficient of imitation, and those two combined inform the shape of the curve. For each measure application, we select an S-curve from within the range of S-curves shown on the right side of the slide. The weighted favorability score, which I'll talk through how we get that in a moment, that weighted favorability score determines the selected S-curve. So a weighted score of 0%, that's the least favorable, and that corresponds to the slowest S-curve. Okay, so that bottom curve. A weighted favorability score of 100%, that's the most favorable. That corresponds to the fastest S-curve on the top of that range. So we assign qualitative favorability ratings for 3 reference attributes based on market data, policy landscape, and professional judgment. And then we benchmark the resulting P and Q coefficients to other recent literature and adjust as needed.
Taylor, hey Taylor, we have a hand up from Quinn, if that's okay.
Sure.
Hi, Taylor. I'm curious about how Cadmus is determining like customer favorability, given that not all of those customers are necessarily the same people. Like, how do you differentiate between if you're electrifying a building, builders versus homeowners versus landlords, and et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's unfortunately not an exact science. You might have gotten that from the fact that we use this qualitative system. But we do have levers to account for things like different perspectives. So multifamily, as you alluded to, there are more perspectives at play than in just a single family home that's owner occupied, right? There's the building owner, and then there's the renters, the occupants. The person making the investment doesn't necessarily benefit from the the savings, the bill savings from reduced energy usage. That difference we would capture in the customer favorability rating here, where we essentially like derate or downgrade the multifamily customers' favorability because of that split incentive issue. And that just essentially reduces the score for multifamily kind of across the board because of that complexity of those extra perspectives. That's actually a perfect segue into the reference attributes up there. So I just talked through the customer attribute. Technology attribute captures aspects of technologies like transaction costs, renovation, operational changes, ancillary benefits. An example of a technology that might get a low rating here, ground source heat pump. There's just inconveniences about that technology that are inherent to its design in certain applications. Market barriers. This captures other characteristics that aren't captured by the other two. So awareness, supply chain limitations or issues with that. We can model through the market barriers. And at the bottom left, there's some examples here. I'll try to race through these. So I do have one more slide I want to get through. But just as an example between like how things can shift with these different changes. So the top row there, air source heat pump and single family home, somewhat favorable customer rating, and then favorable for the other two, yields a pretty high score, 92%. 100% is the highest score there, so that's pretty high. The next second row, the only difference with the first is that it's in multifamily instead of single family. So you can see we brought the customer rating down to somewhat unfavorable, and that affected the score, lowered it to 83. And then you can see in the last two examples there, as those favorability ratings come down, it affects the weighted score, and the lowest score you can get to 0, where all three ratings are unfavorable. I see there's some comments in the chat, but in the interest of time, I'm going to try to press through my last slide, and then we can, if there's time left over, we can circle back. So this slide focuses on the payback acceptance component of the annual adoption calculation. And there's some example curves on the chart in the middle. So payback acceptance represents the portion of customers willing to make an investment with the given payback. So,
and I think we need to go to the next slide. Is that right?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes. Payback acceptance represents the portion of customers willing to make an investment with the given payback. So if we look at the like that top dotted line on the chart at payback of 0, so it's the very left hand side of that chart. What that means is that for low cost appliances and lighting in owner occupied home, if the payback is 0 years, 95% of those customers are willing to make that investment. And you can see some different examples here as well. If we compare the solid blue line and the solid green line, the blue line is a same fuel efficient space heating upgrades. This would be like an efficient furnace or a more efficient heat pump. The green line is space heating electrification. So you can see the green line is below the blue line, not too far below it, but a little bit below it. And what that indicates is that some customers have lower acceptance of electrification upgrades, even if the payback is identical with the same fuel upgrade. So those are just some illustrative examples. Dash purple line at the bottom there, that's cooking electrification in a rental unit, kind of like the floor of, combining the kind of rental aspect with, preferences around cooking fuel. So some key features about these curves that we're using. Low acceptance of high payback periods. So if you look on the right side of the curve of the chart there, these curves all kind of converge at those higher paybacks, which makes sense. If something doesn't pay itself off for 25 years, some portion of people will still do it, but likely not because they think it's a good economic investment. They might have other reasons for wanting to do that. So that's one key feature. Another key feature is differentiation by technology, by income, and by rented versus owned, which is an important feature because the data show that there are elements besides payback that have an effect on uptake. And having a data set that reflects that is beneficial. So, customer preference plays a role, and access to capital also plays a role. Okay, sorry, I kind of sped through that last one a little bit, but that's all I had. So if there's any questions, we can I can take those now.
Great, thanks, Taylor. Yeah, questions from RPAG members. We saw some comments in the chat, but I didn't see any real explicit questions unless you'd like to raise your hand now and ask. Okay.
Hi, it's Eliza. I did have a question.
Yeah, Eliza.
And I'm sorry I didn't raise my hand. I was just having trouble with that feature.
Don't worry.
You know, maybe this has been covered, but I'm thinking about like the cost difference in the technology, because I have heard that like some technology might be higher cost because it's not doesn't have like the market share, right? That and so I was curious if there's any, like technology cost differences. Are they going to stay the same difference over time in this modeling? Could you speak to that? And because I was thinking, would the payback acceptance curve potentially change shape over time?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So the curve itself doesn't change shape over time, but we do calculate payback every year because the rates do change over time. And that's a big impact. That can have a big impact on the calculated payback. We aren't currently incorporating any like cost learning curves over time that would reduce the equipment costs for any particular equipment. And we could consider that in the future, but for now that's not an assumption that we're making.
I think that helps to make sense what you just said about the payback acceptance curve, because the cost isn't really in there, but it would be elsewhere in this analysis year to year. But thank you. That helps. Just curious.
Sure.
Thanks, Eliza. Other questions before we move on and move into wrap up? Yes, JP.
Yeah, would it be possible to have a sensitivity analysis of those payback year calculations for slightly different rates? Just want to have a sense of how sensitive the payback years are to rates, meaning like how much the customer bill impact affects versus capital costs. Because if those curves shift too much with varying rates, then my earlier question about coordination between the original assumption for rates and the output of the PSE analysis becomes even more important because these curves will shift around substantially. So essentially, is there a version of this curve that we see here that has maybe plus 15%, minus 15% rates that you can easily calculate?
These curves themselves don't change with rates. What happens is that so with, let's say, the 2023 decarb rates, we'll calculate the payback for a some measure, and let's say that payback's 10 years. If we were to run a sensitivity with higher gas rates, lower electric rates, that might, let's say, change the payback to instead be like 8 years. And so instead of being at year 10 here, let's just take that top curve. So that would put you at, I don't know, 15% payback acceptance. Instead of being there, you would move down to year 8, closer to 20% payback acceptance for that same measure, just because of that difference in rates and how that affected the payback. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what we would need is a sensitivity of the payback for the specific appliances that you're considering, or the changes of appliances, and then see how much the years change with changing rates. Is it something that could be easily generated?
Might have to take that one back and noodle on it a little bit. We model a bunch of different combinations of things. Let us take that back. But thank you for that feedback.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Well, not seeing other hands up, I'm gonna just thank Taylor for being here and start moving us into the next couple slides, if that's okay. And while I'm doing that, I just wanted to note that we did put a request in the chat. If you're a public observer and you'd like to provide public comment today, please raise your hand so we can get a head count of how many folks we've got. And so Ben will help you move into the panelist role so that you can share your camera if you'd like, or you can stay as an observer role and just we'll turn your mic on. So however you would prefer to be today. But let's keep going in the slides. You can go a couple more slides. Next one, please. I'll quickly breeze through these since we're a little bit short on time. The feedback process is up here. So as you all know, we've been doing this for a while with the RPAG, but for folks that are new or need a refresher, it's in the slide deck. We've got 1 week prior, a couple days before, the day of, all kind of major milestones for these meetings. And then 1 week post meeting is the important one for today. Please provide any feedback that you have. And then PSE provides a feedback report 4 weeks after the meeting. Next slide, please. And a couple upcoming activities or meetings here. We've got the feedback form for this meeting closes, of course, like I just said, in about a week. And then we've got the next RPAG meeting on the schedule for March 26th. And then no RPAG meeting scheduled for April right now. Okay, next slide. And then as always, if you have questions or want to submit feedback, here's all the information you need to do so. There's also an email list, website, or you can leave a voicemail. And so if we want to just copy and paste that into the chat to everyone, Ben, that'd be super helpful. And then we can go to the next slide. So what we're going to do is go ahead and transition into the public comment portion of today's meeting. So if you'd like to speak, please go ahead and raise your hand. Looks like we've got one. And I'll go ahead and just see if they want to come over as a panelist so they can. It looks like it's James Adcock. If you'd like to come over as a panelist, you just have to accept that invitation from Ben. If you want to show your face on video today, which is always a nice thing to be able to see people. Speakers have 3 minutes. As usual, I'll display a timer up on the screen so you can track your time, James. As mentioned, you can share your video if you'd like. We can go ahead and stop sharing the screen so we can see folks. We ask that all comments just stay respectful, and you can go to the next slide, sorry. We just ask that all comments are respectful and focus on the topics from today. And even though this is not a Q&A session, all input will be documented in the written feedback summary. If we run out of time, or if you'd rather share your thoughts in writing, you're always welcome to do that via email or using the online feedback form. And just want to thank you in advance for taking the time today to share your perspective. So I'll go ahead and get my screen up too. Just one moment. And James, are you there?
I'm there. Can you hear me?
I sure can. And then I just want to make sure that you can see I'm going to replace the screen that's showing right now. And here, hold on. And so you can see, let's see. There we go. Can you see that timer up?
Not yet. Now I can.
Great, perfect. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and turn your time on, James.
Thank you. James Adcock, electrical engineer. I've been involved in some regards with PSE on these things for about 15 years now, I guess. Talking first about established social cost of greenhouse gas. That's a science-based measure. It is not Democratic. It is not Republican. It is not federal nor state. This number is currently about $180 to $195 a ton based on scientific peer-reviewed publication. It is not about $60 per ton. How is it just and reasonable that Puget uses a number that's off by a factor of 3? How is it just and reasonable that the UTC use a number that's off by a factor of 3? I would ask that you fix this problem. In regards to monitorized or not monitorized measures, if you cannot measure it, then you do not know what you are doing. If you can measure it, then you can monitorize it. Please monitorize everything. Do what it takes to get there. Otherwise, you're just guessing, you're not optimizing. Our ski industry is currently already destroyed. Next comes the extinction of salmon and mega statewide fires. Please change your behaviors and thought processes, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Okay. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing. And just want to thank everyone for being here today. If you want to share the screen again, we'll go ahead and move into wrap up. And you can just go to the thank you slide. I do want to go ahead and ask Kara Durbin with PSE to just provide kind of a final thank you. And so Kara, over to you to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Annie. And I just, like Annie said, I just want to thank everyone for the rich conversation today. And I know Annie already touched on the feedback report and when it's due. I just really ask that those of you that shared ideas today have ideas after this meeting, particularly of sources that you know of that have metrics that we could use in some of these areas. Please do send us that feedback. We'll be reflecting on the conversation today and whatever comes up in the feedback report to then bring to you all for the March conversation. And we'll also benefit from the CRAG and the EAG conversations as well. So thank you so much for being here and just rolling up your sleeves and working on this with us. With that, I'd like to turn over to Philip to make an announcement.
Hey, thank you, Kara. Well, it was good to hear from Jim. It's been a while since we heard from him, so I'm glad you're still here, Jim. I've been doing this about twice as long as Jim has been coming to our IRP meetings, except in the range of 60 hours a week kind of thing. I will be riding off into the sunset. So come April 3rd will be my last day at PSE. At least as an employee. I'll still be doing some part-time consulting here and there. And even if I'm not going to be attending these meetings in the future for money, I will at least be attending them as a civilian because I am really excited about how this is all going to turn out. So thank you all for those of you that for those of you that have just started in our process. I really appreciate you helping us out. For those of you that have been around for a very long time, I appreciate that as well. And I'm sure we'll get this all figured out. So thank you all.
Thanks, Philip. Sure, a lot of sadness amongst that, but happy for you. Well, thank you, everyone. And that wraps us for today. We'll see you all at the March meeting. And please feel free to fill out our Zoom poll once you exit so we can hear how you liked this meeting and prepare for the next. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all. Congrats on your retirement, Philip.